Whenever you're recording on an audio, MIDI instrument, or sampler track, you do have to keep in mind the input and output destinations, or another way to think about that is the source and the destination. There's always somewhere where the information comes into the computer to be recorded and then gets played back or sent out of the computer, so keep in mind that whole source and destination concept. So let's add one MIDI track to our project, and I'm going to do that by right or control clicking in the track list and choosing Add MIDI Track, and I'm going to call this Piano, just as an example, and I'm just going to add one, then I'll click on Add Track, and now I have to think about where the information that I'm recording onto this MIDI track is going to be received from and where it's going to be transmitted to. Again, source and destination. Let's come over here to the Object Inspector, and you make sure that you have your first tab open, and then you find your input setting. The most common input setting, and it's the default, is all MIDI inputs. And that means that it will record from any MIDI input that you have on your computer, whether it be a USB keyboard or other USB controller, or if you have a MIDI device plugged into a MIDI interface on your computer. And the all MIDI input ports allows you to record from multiple different controllers. So if you had two different controllers, like two different keyboards or one keyboard and a pad controller, then this MIDI track will be able to receive from both of those. But you can configure which controllers adhere to the all MIDI inputs category by going to the Studio menu, and the very bottom here is Studio Setup, and then make sure that you find MIDI port setup on the left-hand side. And over here, I can see all of my MIDI devices that I have plugged into the computer, but you'll notice that there's a setting off to the right here that says in all MIDI inputs. In other words, these MIDI input devices can be part of that all MIDI input setting, but you can also disable the ones that you don't want to use. But I'm going to leave them all on because I do like to record from all of my ports from time to time. But if you wanted to record from just one specific keyboard or one specific MIDI controller, come over to the input setting here and choose that controller from your options. In other words, if I wanted to record just from my MIDI USB keyboard, which is called the Laboratory, I could check that here. And then the output setting, again, it's in and out or source and destination. The output setting is where that information is going to go. Right now I have it set to the Laboratory, so it's going out of a MIDI port on my MIDI keyboard controller. But if you clicked on that, you can send it to a number of different destinations, including rack instruments. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But let's go ahead and record enable this track, and then I'm going to come to the transport panel down here and click the record button, and then I'm going to record some notes. And as I record these notes, if you look at the display, you can see these long lines or short lines if I play short notes, or if I play chords, then those chords will show up on the display. The longer I hold the MIDI notes down, the longer they'll appear on the display. Then I'll hit stop by coming down here and hitting the stop button, or you can press the space bar to stop as well. And then I'm going to scroll back here, move my playback cursor. You'll notice I'm not hearing anything, and the reason why is because the destination that I've chosen makes no sound on its own. It's just an empty MIDI controller keyboard. There's no synthesizer inside. So that's why you're not hearing anything, which is okay right now because we're not really recording anything for real. But if you wanted to open that MIDI information into the editor, just double-click on it, and it will appear down here in the editor. And if we did want to hear something, then you'd need to plug the track itself into the appropriate MIDI output port of your computer and have a receiving MIDI device set to the proper channel number, because the channel, there are 16 different MIDI channels. You'd want to make sure that the transmit channel of the track itself is set to the same MIDI channel as your external MIDI synthesizer or VST or virtual instrument. And let's go ahead and create a rack instrument to have that information played back. So I'm going to come over to the VST instrument window right here, make sure I'm on the VSTi tab, and then I'm going to add a rack instrument. So I'm going to choose Halion Sonic SE right here. It'll take just a minute to load up. And when I see this dialog box, since I already have a MIDI track I'm going to assign that data to, I'm going to cancel the creation of a MIDI track, which would just add another empty MIDI track to our project. And let's go ahead and choose Piano, and acoustic piano. And I'm going to scroll down here to the Yamaha S90 ES piano. That will load into the first slot on channel 1. And now I can come to the output setting of my MIDI track and choose the first rack instrument, which is Halion Sonic SE. And now when I play that back, I'll be able to hear the notes that I played. And next, let's add an instrument track.